to Ecoholics. Today we are going to understand a very basic concept of microeconomics, which is the law of demand. Law of demand, as given by Alfred Marshall, talks about the basics of demand law, the basics of inverse relationship between the price and the demand, which we are going to study very soon, and also the graphical representation of the demand curve. However, I will give you a small trivia about the law of demand. Initially, before the graphical representation happened by Marshall, was given by Marshall, it was also given by two other economists in their papers. So in the research papers for international trade, Charles Devenant, and in further other paper by Gregory King, the concept and the statement of law of demand was given. However, formally and graphically it was represented by Alfred Marshall, and which is why it's famously known as Marshallian law of demand. So let's begin with the concept, and today what we're going to understand is the law of demand and how does it impact the price and consumer behavior. So let's begin. Let's dive into the law of demand by basic definition and meaning, right? Because we start with every topic by a meaning and by a definition to it. So let's have a definition to the law of demand as well. The law of demand states that everything being equal or all things being equal, which is also called as ceteris paribus, okay, which basically means that everything kept constant, we will focus on only few things, okay. I will also tell you why we keep this ceteris paribus, but before that let's complete the definition. So ceteris paribus, or all things kept constant, all things kept given, we say that as the price of a good or a service increases, as the price increases, the quantity demanded. Now here, please understand what word, what terminology I'm using. The quantity demanded by the consumers of these goods and services decreases, and vice versa. So what kind of relationship we have over here? It's an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. Most of the students, while writing the definition, just write that, okay, there's an inverse relationship between price and demand. But it's not demand that you have to speak about. It's the quantity demanded that a person or a consumer is going to use for a certain price, for which has been paid for a certain commodity or a service, right? So here we talk about the price of a good. When it increases, the quantity demanded decreases, and when the price of a good or service will decrease, the quantity demanded by that consumer for that good or service will increase. So it's the price that determines the quantity. Okay, this is also a very, very important point that students misunderstand, or they do not understand it fully while reading economics initially. Okay, so price is the factor which will determine whether the quantity demanded is increasing or decreasing. It will be the price, okay, and not the vice versa, right? So here we have the basics or the basic definition of law of demand. But let us also understand how does it impact the consumers and the other things around us. Okay, so let's begin with that. Now, while we talk about the impact, let us talk about an overall impact that law of demand as a concept has. Law of demand is a very theoretical concept, and many a times you will see that while learning about macroeconomics or while learning about other theories of microeconomics, there will be certain exceptions to this law. There will be certain commodities or services which will not abide this law, right? That will happen. But what is the impact of this law on various factors that are present in the world? Let's figure out that first, okay? So here we have the very first thing, which is willingness to buy. Now, when you talk about the law of demand, law of demand for a good or service is something that we're looking at. And whenever we talk about demand, we are indefinitely talking about the willingness and the ability to purchase a commodity or service. Willingness meaning what? Willingness means the will or the interest to purchase a good or service is the willingness, plus the ability, that means the affordability, the money that you have to purchase that good or service. If both are present, both of these factors are present, only then we will consider it into the law of demand. So many a times when you go window shopping to a mall, or when people surf around for phones, for clothing, for apparel, for glasses, for shoes, for furniture, for anything, for any good or service, it will not considered into the law of demand concept, because it's not economics over there. It's just a behavior that is shown by consumers. Probably window shopping is shown by consumers, or a display of interest is shown by the consumers, which will not be considered as the concept of demand that we learn in economics. So when we learn economics, in that we are learning these concepts very strictly associated to money, and which is why the willingness plus the ability to consume that product or service are necessary. So that's point number 3 that you should note while learning economics, while learning this concept. Then the first impact is, of course, on the willingness. When there's an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded, obviously, if the price increases of a certain commodities, the willingness to purchase might deteriorate, okay? For maybe a certain vehicle or a certain car or a bike that you wished to purchase, or a certain apparel that you wished to purchase was costing you maybe a certain 1,000 rupees or certain dollars. But now, if the price has increased, your willingness to purchase is deteriorating, because you probably are thinking that, okay, I don't probably need that bike, I don't probably need that car, or I don't probably need that apparel. Okay, I don't need that service right now, because my necessities, my needs are only associated to my affordability, right? So first thing impact worthy is the willingness to buy. Second is the low revenue to business. Now this has to be understood from a very macroeconomics perspective. Okay, when there's an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded, if the price hikes much more than expected by the consumers, and the consumers start lowering their demand or lowering their interest to buy, okay, even when there's affordability, they would be like, okay, we do not require this right now, let's not purchase goods or service unnecessarily. Obviously, what will happen when the demand will decrease, okay, the market demand will decrease for certain goods and services, the businesses are going to be impacted because of the low sales and low revenue. So that's point number 2. Then you have the impact on consumer behavior. Obviously, everything that is considered as a part of consumption is directly or indirectly impacting the consumer behavior. Whenever you go to shopping, okay, and whenever you're purchasing, for example, you have to purchase a laptop. Now there are a variety of laptops. Certain configuration that you require for a certain laptop probably is very expensive, and which is why you might showcase a certain consumer behavior, even if you like that product very much, you like that laptop very much, but still you will be backing out. You'll be like, okay, fine, let me save some money for some more months, and probably by next year I'll be able to buy that product. So that's consumer behavior which is shown. Okay, when you purchase a good or a service, you will obviously talk about your bank balance. If you want to purchase a certain commodity or a certain service which is very expensive. So a consumer will always behave in a certain way, looking at their own needs and responsibilities that they have to fulfill first, and then of course go towards that commodity or service. And that's why the consumer behavior is a very, very integral part of law of demand. Presently, the emerging field of behavioral economics actually talks about the consumer behavior a lot, and there's a whole lot of psychology associated to it. So it's something that has to be dealt with also, and has a major impact on the law of demand and vice versa. Then we have the allocation of resources. Allocation of resources are considered as basics, your raw material, the commodities that are required for certain types of production, and the availability of those resources, and the price up and down of those resources will also matter a lot with regards to how the law of demand will fluctuate. A small example of that can be a raw material which is utilized for production of a certain energy requirement, let's say coal or fossil fuels, which are majorly utilized for thermal power energy. Now, the coal availability will definitely impact its price, and the price that will be associated to the procurement will definitely impact on how much energy can be produced by the industries, the government, as well as the private industries, and so on and so forth. So coming down to the rate of electricity that we use per unit will also be a major determinant factor of that particular fluctuation that happened in the law of demand because of the availability of the resource. So allocation of resources also gets impacted because of the fluctuation of law of demand. And finally, the policy making. For every micro or macroeconomic principle that exists in economics or in the economy is dealt by policy making. A strong policy making will always adhere to not just macroeconomic problems and issues, but also the microeconomic concepts that are dealing with the producers, the consumers, the distribution chain, the supply chain. Everything is microeconomics in that, and which is why the policy making also gets impacted in a positive or a negative manner due to the fluctuation in the prices and the quantity demanded. So that's what we understand from the perspective of the impact of law of demand. Now, in the conclusion of our concept, let us also extend this concept towards diagrammatic representation, which was actually given by Marshall. Now let's have a classic diagram of demand curve. Many students ask about whether the demand curve should be a straight line downward sloping. Well, yes, it should be downward sloping, but does not necessarily have to be a straight line. It can have like a curvature also. It can be a dotted line which can have certain big curvatures and dents also, because that's reality. This is a graphical representation just to understand the basics, okay? And which is why whenever you draw in your examinations, at that time draw a simple diagram like that, because it will be easier for you all to allocate points of price and quantity demanded, okay? And it will be a very structured diagram. It will not have dips and ups and downs. So it will look also very proper, right? So while in examinations use such type of diagrams, but you always have to open up your horizon and understand that when you look into the statistics or in database, you will find such diagrams also which will have fluctuations. The diagram will be a curvature also. It will be like a slanting curvature also. It will not be probably a very proper straight line, okay? So you always have to have scope of understanding that also, right? Now understanding about this classic diagram of the law of demand, which was given by Alfred Marshall. So on the y-axis you have the price, and on the x-axis you have the the quantity demanded. Okay, quantity demanded is something which is like a very important term, so you should put the quantity demanded in your x-axis. This is your origin. Okay, so the downward slope of this demand curve is associated because of the inverse relationship between price and the quantity demanded. So let's say that the price was P1D. Okay, let me erase this so that you will be able to understand. Let's say that the price was P1D, okay, and when the price was P1D, okay, the quantity demanded was Q1D. So you point it on the graph, okay. Then similarly for this and for this, you allocate the similar points. And when you draw the curve filling these points, you will see that there's a downward slope in the demand curve, which just graphically represents the same thing that we understood, that there's an inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. When the price is high, okay, or when the price increases, rather say that when the price increases from P2D to P1D, the quantity will be, you have the quantity will be reduced, the quantity demanded will be reduced because of that price hike. And same goes for when the price decreases from P2D to P3D, so you will have a inverse impact on the quantity demanded. That's the classic diagram of price and quantity demanded by Alfred Marshall, given for law of demand. Now, lastly, let's understand with a small example the same concept and another associated concept related to the individual demand curve as well as the market demand curve. Okay. Individual demand curve and market demand curve are also two concepts that you will definitely study while studying law of demand, and they are the basic concepts. Individual demand curve is the demand curve associated with an individual household, an individual entity, okay, the individual unit. While the market demand curve is like the aggregate of those individual demand curves at a certain particular time period, aggregated together, and that becomes the market demand curve, which can be easily understood by this simple diagram. So here we have individual demand curves 1 and 2 for two different households, okay, household number 1 and household number 2. Here we are talking about certain chocolates, okay, so we talk about chocolates that have to be consumed by two different households, okay, at a certain price. So let's say that the quantity of chocolates is given on the x-axis and the price of the chocolates is given on the y-axis. We are only having one type of chocolates, okay, it's not variety, it's just homogeneity. One type of chocolate is being considered over here, okay. Now here you have a downward demand curve for household number 1's demand and household number 2's demand. And why is that? Let's understand that as well. Okay, so let's say that we are talking about household number 1's demand curve. This is the first demand curve, okay. Now here, when the chocolate was for $5, okay, at that time the consumption of chocolates was 5 units. So at $5 there was a consumption of 5 units of chocolates, matlab 5 chocolates, okay. However, when the price decreased, okay, to $3, then the consumption increased to 8 chocolates. So we can say that when the price decreased from $5 to $3, there was an increase in the quantity demanded from 5 chocolates to 8 chocolates for household number 1. Now let's talk about household number 2. Household number 2 consumes at $5. Household number 2 consumes, let's say, 2 chocolates, okay? While when the price decreases of these chocolates, the consumption increases to 3 chocolates, okay? So that's a small increase in consumption. Now, why the household number 1 has larger increase and household number 2 has smaller increase in the quantity demanded, we will talk about this topic in our next module, in our next video. But before that, let's understand what happens to the individual demand curve and the market demand curve. So here we have understood that there are 2 individual households who have consumed chocolates at different prices and different quantities. Okay. Now let's talk about the market demand curve. Now we have taken the same price, okay, for the chocolates, and now we aggregate these 2 households quantity demanded. Okay, so let's talk about household number 1. Household number 1 at $5 was consuming how much? Was consuming 5 chocolates. Okay, and household number 2 was consuming at $5 2 chocolates. So 5 plus 2 becomes 7. So 7 is the number of chocolates that are consumed in a market demand, because it's aggregate, at $5 and at $3 matlab at a lower price. Okay, obviously the quantity demanded will increase. So household number 1 was consuming 8 chocolates while household number 2 was consuming 3 chocolates. So 8 plus 3 becomes 11, and that's what is the market demand or the market demand curve. So that's what is to be understood when we talk about law of demand. Law of demand has variety of concepts, including the properties of law of demand, the exceptions to law of demand, the movement and shift of the demand curve, and many such more things that we are going to discuss in our future videos. Right? So that was the concept of law of demand. That was the basic concept of law of demand. And I hope that you have understood this concept. If there are any queries that you have to raise with regards to this concept, make sure to comment it in the comment section and stay tuned for more such videos in the same context. Till then, see you next time.